Blog Talk Radio.
Hello, I'm Norma Owen, and this is Norma Radio. We've done a few shows as the Future Working Together gang. Well, just like we speak truth to our listeners, we want to challenge ourselves and take it up a notch. We're your neighbor in cyberspace. Think of these shows as a pleasant summer evening conversation over the fence. We'll be talking more about the details as the weeks roll on, but for now, think about grassroots, taking your own power to create your own future. We hope that we can really help you navigate today. Okay, now that we've got that programming announcement out of the way, let's get to this week's Foresight 2025 conversation. We've got Charlie and Terry back to enlighten us about a deeper picture of the future world of work and just how we'll be seen by others. Okay, Charlie, how about you enlighten us a little bit on that?
Okay, Norma, thank you. So what we're going to do today is take a look, what's it going to look like when we break out of this industrial cocoon that we're in and morph into our future selves, as we've been plathering on about. I like to call what we're going to become is artisans of thought, and there's a lot embedded there, so let me try to unpack it a little bit. Artisans implies creativity, talent, and innovation, and thought implies the medium that we work in. Just as a painter is an artist who works in a visual medium of pigments and canvas, for example, but the new worker, and I really hate to use the word worker, but we're stuck with it, we think will become one of these artisans of thought. Terry, there?
Okay. Yeah, well, just to expand on the concept of artisans of thought, you have to think of it almost in terms of this is beyond habituated thought. Most of us think about 90% of our thoughts during the day are the ones we thought the day before and usually the year before. And an artisan of thought is somebody who thinks on a conscious level. They control their thoughts through trying to introduce something that's new, and they've connected to their essence, and they really don't want to return to their false or adaptive self around their thinking. They just really want to generate new thoughts and things that are going to move their belief system forward in an evolutionary way to what they really, truly want to do.
Well, guys, you know what? I really like the term. And, you know, I really have noticed when we start talking about those jobs number, that the unemployment numbers and everything else, that the Bureau of Labor Statistics is going to go nuts trying to categorize this one. I think, you know, those numbers that say no longer looking for a job is actually not accounting for these artisans. But, hey, either be on the bus or be under it. So with that, toss it to you, Charlie.
Okay, thanks, Norm. Well, let me kind of frame this up and say that I think there are 5 basic questions that we can ask about this emergent category. And that's, who are they? What do they do? How are they unique? How do they organize themselves? And then lastly, how do they interact with the larger world outside of themselves? So I'm going to briefly kind of run through each of those 5 questions and try to summarize our thinking. And just as a note, obviously there's much more that we have behind us, and we would invite questions and inquiries, and we can provide you with even more information. But let's go to the top and say, well, who are these artisans of thought? Artisans are those in our society who continuously practice creativity and invention. They take what is inside their minds and their hearts and give it expression that we can all share. Usually, frankly, they're seen as different, unique, and sometimes living right out on the boundaries of our conventional social mores. I can only imagine that in ancient times there were shamans and tribal medicine men who were, at that time, those artisans of thought. In today's post-industrial world, these people often gravitate towards the arts, science, and the most avant-garde discipline, in our humble opinion, that of design. And we'll return to that in a later show. The problem we have with them is that we don't know what to call them. Like Norma said, you know, the Bureau of Labor Statistics is going to find a very difficult category to put these people in. But because they're artisans of thought, they are the transformers among us. They don't really have job titles or recognized positions of status and power in today's world. We don't yet have a language or even a grammar to talk about them, or let alone to think about them, as Terry was alluding to. Societal and cultural advances often travel far ahead of the contemporary culture. So, for example, what would you have called an airline pilot in the year 1650? You wouldn't even have the capacity to understand the concept, let alone put a label on it. Another favorite artisan of thought is a friend of ours, Daniel Pink. Dan has written several books which fit around the edges of this idea that we're talking about here. And frankly, his work has always been an inspiration for us. Free Agent Nation in 2001, A Whole New Mind in 2005, and now Drive in 2010. So I'd invite you to check out some of Dan's work to get a little more detail. Let me take it another step now and say, well, what do these artisans of thought do? Here's a quote. In a world where advanced degrees and professional disciplines are rapidly becoming a commodity, prosperity belongs to individuals and the ability to react with agility to unpredictable market forces, data, and events. That is what people are beginning to call a conceptual worker, which dovetails with our idea of an artisan of thought. Artisans of thought transform ideas into reality, which we can all sense, experience, and can be used with others or for others, who are without artisans' viewpoint and skills. Before I list a few examples, consider what transformation really is. Artisans of thought are about the central task of transformation. Consider this example, and this is one, and we have several. A healer is a person that works to transform another person from a state of illness to a state of wellness. When practiced in an ethical manner, the patient can't go back to being ill unless they choose to do so by doing something they probably shouldn't. Assumptions of their behavior are changed. They have different diets. They have different patterns of lifestyles and practices. The patient looks different. They're more healthy and alive. Finally, the purpose for them changes continuously so that they strive for a state of health. What has happened there is, in our terms, an artisan of thought has helped someone transform themselves. In this context, it was a healer. Anyone who's ever witnessed a person overcome an addiction or survive a life-threatening illness has seen this practice of artisans of thought in reality. So how are they unique? What makes them different? How do they stand out? Well, they're relatively well-educated in our society. They have significant practical experience, and they're well-connected and are focused on their purpose. These are the basic characteristics which separate artisans of thought from the workforce in general. Moreover, they are conscious of these characteristics and actively work to improve these qualities. Another uniqueness is that they not only have formal education, but tremendous practical experience, almost half and half. Just as it wasn't enough for a stonemason in the 15th century to have the requisite technical skills, but they had to publicly demonstrate their craft. These people seek out opportunities to show others what they can do, and like any good artisan, they assemble a portfolio of their work which they share with others. You need not look much farther than the social media to see the evidence of this, video resumes, personal websites, and massive connections among these artisans of thought. The last distinguishing characteristic is their personal focus. Being creative, giving something back to the community, or pursuing a career in the off the beaten path, as Thoreau would say, is not always financially rewarding, at least at first. Your present host here can testify to that fact. We've all heard about the starving artist and the wandering poet. Well, that's what these people are in today's society. But that's changing. And it's changing because these folks are finding different ways to organize themselves. Historically, workers organize themselves around issues of common interest. They live out the strategy that there is strength in numbers. The prototypical workers' organization in the industrial era was the labor union, but that's not going to work for these people that we're talking about. Simply, the war for talent is over, and talent has won. The artisans of thought are moving into a state of primary control in our society. We believe that the primary organizing form of these artisans will be something akin to medieval guilds. Guilds and confederations are going to return as a primary social organizational model for these smaller groups of people. Guilds will be responsible for recruitment of the talent. some training, more like mentoring actually, and enforcement of process quality standards. Guilds will be based on a common interest in a particular topic area or expertise, such as we see today with the Screen Actors Guild, for example. I don't want to step on our own thinking here, and we'll return to this idea of guilds in a later show and do a deeper dive. But for right now, just think about that's how they're going to organize themselves. But what you are seeing be created right here at our first get-together that we had in San Luis Obispo and the Future Working Together Tribe, and now Norma Radio, is really a living out of becoming artisans of thought and forming guilds. But more of that later. Let me get into how these folks act upon the world. It's not enough just for them to be with themselves, but they're also driven to do something positive for the community and the societies that they live in. So making these ideas live and breathe is a thing that seems to be missing today. Politicians have lots of ideas but can't act. Our sacred institutions like education know what needs to be done, but nothing happens. And that is why these people are important. They're self-organizing and they make things happen all by themselves. They operate from a set of shared beliefs about the world, how they know it, and their responsibility for being stewards of the environment. The major shared belief that they have is about sustainability. That's sustainability with a capital S. They're motivated to work with and maybe for and live among others who have a similar set of worldviews and expectations. So how do they act in a political sense? Well, as Max Weber would say, they're a party unto themselves. They're fiercely independent and suspicious of the old guard. They're a pollster's nightmare come true. They tend to be engaged more at the grassroots level, especially those who are manifesting their values. Probably the most important example of this was the 2008 presidential campaign in the United States, where a new internet-based political movement took hold and was arguably responsible for the election's outcome. The last way in which artisans of thought operate upon the world is cleverness. They place high value on being clever, outthinking others, especially those who don't share their core beliefs. They're game changers. That's their purpose in life. As the old industrial capital system erodes and crumbles, this group is recreating the world. They are the seeds planted in the soil of community over the past 3 or 4 generations, and they're about ready to break through, in our humble opinion. Norms, back to you.
You know, Charlie and Terry, when I listen to you both, I can't help but wonder, you know, as we're talking about the artisans of thought, is this really the millennials we hear so much about? I mean, are the folks who are becoming, are these the folks that are becoming our artisans of thought?
Well, not exactly. It's more about beliefs and an attitude than it is your chronological age. And I know we like to group the separate people into these age groups because it's easier to talk about them, you know, the youngsters and the old geezers and what have you. But these artisans come in all sizes, shapes, and colors. And age doesn't seem to be the defining characteristic. I mean, I've got one kid who's 40 and is going on 80, if you know what I mean. And anybody who's got children probably has experienced that.
Oh, man, can I tell you? Yep, I've been there, done that. Well, Terry, you know, you've got a great story of jumping out of the norm and into your own passion. I really do count you as a shining example of an artisan of thought. Can you tell us a little bit about that transition at a time, really, when boomers and nexters were still supposed to toe the line and keep a good job and retire with a gold watch?
Well, yeah, in a lot of ways, it is kind of an interesting story, only because I did it out of pure ignorance and pain, in that I just knew I had a meteoric rise in the corporate world, and none of the symbology of income or position was doing it for me anymore. I called myself spiritually bankrupt, and at the time, my wife was pretty concerned because I didn't know what else I would do, but I just knew I didn't want to do one more dog and pony show and briefing to a bunch of executives, and I just literally couldn't do it. I was in the aerospace industry and was in engineering leadership positions and whatnot, so I walked away from it not knowing what I was going to do, but just trying to listen to myself intuitively. And this was back in 1989, actually. So there was not a lot of material available that we have today. The beauty of today is that we've got tremendous information and thoughts and just this morning, Norm, you enlightened me about generation flux that we're all in, and it doesn't matter on demographic age or anything else. It's just kind of a level of consciousness, because I could feel that sense of calling. I mean, it had been bubbling up in me for a number of years, but I just felt this calling was stillborn in me and wanted to come out. So, I drifted around for 5 years working in a whole other industry and doing a whole different thing, but it came back to me slowly about coaching, and the concept of leadership or life purpose coaching was just bubbling up, and it wasn't really in the public's consciousness yet. But I was in the early days of that movement and really just discovered that it's naturally what I was gifted at and passionate and purposeful about, is being one of those midwives of this next stage of human transformation and helping people get to their own purpose and calling and be intrinsically motivated, meaning they were passionate and purposeful about what they were doing. So it was not a grand design. I did not have this radical sabbatical and moment of enlightenment. I just kind of walked on out there and just tried to figure it all out intuitively. And it wasn't necessarily a very pretty experience in a lot of ways, but there was lots of soul growth over it. And, that's a lot of what we're trying to offer everybody, is what are those learnings and what's that wisdom really all about. Back to you, Norma.
Thank you for sharing that, Terry. I just want to let everybody know sometimes the transition isn't so easy, especially for those that have started off and actually creating the way. But let me tell you, it can be done. But you know what? As I think about listening to you guys, I've got a couple of questions for you, Charlie. First off, in addition to T Story, are there any examples of this trend emerging that we can see?
Oh, yeah. I mean, I don't think a week goes by that I don't talk to somebody else who is embarking upon the transition that Terry was talking about. But in a larger context, I say perhaps the most powerful demonstration of this organizing principle has been in the Middle East with the advent of the Arab Spring last year. Country after country, Tunisia, Egypt, Libya, and perhaps now Syria in turn, have witnessed the power of disenfranchised social groups, usually younger people, organizing in a new way. Now that the genie is out of the bottle, it's going to be very, very difficult to get it back in. Right now, this might appear as a silly PR stunt or reminiscent of the 60s happenings, but the larger story is that these people are learning how to harness technology for social organizing purpose, and this leads us to another Artisans of Thought organizing principle, which is to use the technology.
That definitely has given us some deep stuff to think about, more than what we can go into today. But you know what? My last question, in our last 11 minutes or so of the show, is what do you think people need to do in order to leapfrog into this Artisan of Thought movement? Are there some things you can give us?
Oh, yeah. There's a whole bunch, but let me cut it down to 3 major points for folks. First of all is that they need to take responsibility for their own destiny. They've got to do it themselves. Declare yourself to be an artisan of thought. You might use a different term. And your plan is your own personal answer to the 5 parts of the question that we've presented here today. Write them down. Who are you? What do you do? How are you different? How do you organize yourself? Memorize them and repeat them often. Then I think you need to realize you don't need someone else to give you what your identity is, your status, or a formal license to do what you need to do. You don't need a degree, a certificate, or a diploma to be an artisan. You just have to practice it and communicate it. And then lastly, like with any good discipline, practice your art. Every chance you get, show people what you do. Tell them what your passion is, and just live it out there on your sleeve. And I think you'll be surprised how many folks become attracted to you, and pretty soon they'll start asking you, wow, okay, how do I do that? So those are the 3 things.
Thank you, Charlie. Well, in a quick trip, as it turns out, we've got some guests coming in from the north. Actually, we let them over the border for today, at least over the internet border from Canada. We've got some great news. We have 2 new shows coming our way and your way, Marketing on the Edge and Talent to Work. Just because navigating the future of work can really be overwhelming, as y'all have heard. It's kind of difficult sometimes to navigate these waters in this new economy. But to give you as many tools as we can, I've asked a few more neighbors in the Future Working Together Guild and Norma Radio neighborhood, in addition to Terry, Charlie, and myself. We're giving you more information to navigate and be successful during this shift in economies. To give you more info on Marketing on the Edge, I've asked Amitav Dash and Bill Dubbs of the D2 Group to join us and give us a glimpse of Marketing on the Edge. So, Amitav and Bill, how about you guys take it away and tell us more?
Well, thank you, Norma. Thank you, Charlie, and thank you, Terry, for inviting us on Foresight 2025, and in particular this Artisans of Thought episode, and thank you for inviting us to be part of Norma Radio. The plan for Marketing on the Edge, or what we're thinking of marketing over the edge, because we're thinking of throwing the entire rule book out the window and right over the edge, is to create a show that is about helping people, companies, and communities address their future-forward goals through marketing, branding, and communication, which can also encompass advertising, branding, and public relations at times. We're also planning to tie it to other Norma radio shows through being able to answer specific questions that may have arisen during Foresight 2025 and Talent to Work, so there's continuity and cross-linking between all three shows and eventually any other show that gets a broadcast slot on Norma Radio. Bill?
Yes, actually, in our experience, we've seen many marketing and strategies that work and many more that don't. And our input here in this series of shows will be meant to help you, the listener, navigate the waters of branding and marketing to help you see what the right course is for you and your business. Right, Amitav?
Yeah, I think what Bill's saying is too often we've come across marketing companies that provide their quote-unquote patented processes, which they try and plug a company into or graft onto a company without determining that company or that community's needs, how it fits their people, their market, their offerings, their strategies. We believe that there's something you have to go over with matching principles, that these are the foundations of success. And sometimes that means foregoing a strategy that is foundationally stronger for one that better matches the client. And I think Bill has a few points on that.
Absolutely. As Norma pointed out earlier in the show, it all has to come from a grassroots level. It has to be comfortable as well as effective, and in being comfortable, it will be effective. It really has to fit so that it works. Let's face it. The shoes have to fit, or you're not going to be able to walk very far.
So if you've ever had a marketing solution that has pinched you, and not in a good way, then you'll want to tune into Marketing Over the Edge. And also send us your questions, too, as we want the show to be as interactive as possible. And we don't want to end up as just some hot air field talking heads that spout off about anything and everything, because we do that in our private time anyway, so there's no reason to offer that on the radio. Norma, Charlie, Terry?
Great. Thank you, Amitav and Bill. Hey, now, you definitely don't want to miss Marketing On and Over the Edge. Now, also beginning June 13th, we're going to launch Talent to Work with Lori Sortino. Be sure to look and listen for more details in the weeks to come. We're running out of time here, but I really would like to invite our listeners to send us questions and comments. We'll bring them back and maybe devote just one show to answering our audience questions. Someday we hope to go live, and maybe we'll be able to take those questions during the show. I'd like to remind everyone this broadcast is another in a series we'll be hosting over the next 6 months. Now, remember, you can find us at www.futureworkingtogether, and we have both of our websites up on the Blog Talk Radio and for Norma Radio in the details section. Well, that's it for this week. Thanks again, everyone, for all of you, and to all of you who are taking the time to tune in. We'll be back next week. Until then, when you come to that fork in the road, definitely take it. Thank you, and have a great week. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. Thank you.